Cool. So yeah, my original idea for this topic was just SF canvases, because part of my work is in the corporate world, and I thought, I use a lot of visualization there. But then as I developed this presentation, my thinking kind of changed along the way to visualizing solution focus, which is a different way of coming at things. So we'll start off with the idea of canvases, and then we'll explore SF a little more visually. And even like, because I know last year there were people on the call who were visually impaired, I was thinking, how would I do this with somebody who's visually impaired? So even beyond that sense. So anyway, a bit about me. Some of you already met me in 2 previous sessions, but I love that SF can span my entire world. So the left side of that screen is about my work in the corporate world, working as an executive leadership coach, doing SF and agile transformations, doing organizational change work, and coaching in that world. On the right-hand side is my other world, which is health and well-being practice, where I use energy psychology, kinesiology, energy medicine, and also solution-focused brief therapy. So I love the fact that this way of thinking, this approach to things, can span these worlds. Sometimes there's a bit of a trick in shifting from one-on-one conversations where the client's the expert in the world, where you're working in a corporate setting where there's a little bit of expertise that you're bringing. There's a little bit of an expectation that you are bringing some expertise into that situation as well, not just the coaching questions. I don't think you can be as detached from the content in the corporate world. And this talk particularly, and I love this conference, the fact that I've been able to speak in both of these worlds. The first session I did today was kind of leaning a bit more towards the left. The one I did just before this was towards the right. This one is, again, could possibly span both. So I just love this fact. All right, a couple of quotes here about using models. These are just purely random, and I apologize, I didn't take the time to find the sources of these. But I love the first one, that all models are wrong, they just vary in their usefulness. And SF, if anything, is about what's useful. So I think that quote came from someone in statistics. But I love, there's another phrase within SF where we talk about useful misunderstandings. We ask a question, the client heard something different, and their answer is fantastic. It just wasn't the question that we asked, but it doesn't matter. It was a useful misunderstanding. The map is not the territory, so if the map is wrong, don't try and correct the territory. Again, a visual reference, if I can see a little further, it's by standing on the shoulders of giants. Isaac Newton quoted that from someone else. And again, that's standing and visualizing and seeing further. And then just a lyric from a song, I can see clearly now the rain is gone. So yeah, just random quotes. Has anybody else got a favorite sort of visualization quote that they would throw out? Just comes off the top of the head. Oh, well, if you think of one along the way, please unmute. We've got a small enough group, so feel free to just jump in along the way. All right, this is like a scrapbook, if you like, of examples of visual SF. And take the time, because what I'd love is, if you've got an example sitting on your computer, feel free to dig it up, and I'll make sure everybody's got permission to screen share, because I've only got, half dozen, 6, 7 examples. So if you've got an example of how you've used solution focus visually, feel free to dig it out, and you'll get an opportunity to share it shortly. So starting from the more generic, there's some animation in this slide. The very generic model that Mark McCurgo came up with, called the Albert model. And this is more a visual model versus a canvas. But I thought it was interesting, if we're starting from the idea of visualizing solution focus, this wasn't a bad place to start. And it's the idea that, there's a problem conversation that could head down to a dreaded future, maybe. But there's also this conversation about what's been working. Actually, let's make sure you can see my pointer. Can you see my mouse pointer now? Cool. I like to point at things. So yeah, there's this difference of perspective and conversation. So finding what's working, noticing useful qualities and skills, and moving towards a future perfect or a preferred future. it's just a visual model of SF. I wanted to throw that one up there because, you know, when you're first introducing SF, it can be a model that's useful in terms of discussion. Has anybody used this to start a conversation or as part of training? Yep, Todd. Yep. Anyone else? Oh, I saw Edwin unmute, but no. All right. Now, believe it or not, this is a visual version of SF. And I mentioned before I'd talk about a session where I had 90 minutes, but I ran out of time. So I don't know if you can see just on the right of that image, there's a little 10 post-it note that's off to the side. And we had trouble because they were the cheap post-it notes that like to fall off the wall. But on the left, we had a 0, and on the right, we had a 10. And this version, this was a senior leadership team having an offsite. They just had one of their busiest quarters they'd ever had. And they asked me to run a retrospective for them. And of course, I was going to run it in a solution-focused way. And what I asked them, and I was just standing at the front of the room, I stepped over to one side of the room and said, you know, this is 0. I stepped over the other side of the room and said, this is the 10. This is your ideal. This is the best quarter you could have had. Imagine thinking about that. And 0 is the opposite. And I said, okay, think of a number between 0 and 10. Don't tell anyone. Doesn't matter. It's not about the number. It's a subjective thing. It's about the questions we're going to ask for that. And then I said, okay, write down all the things that make it not 0. And I did ask, anybody have 0, 1? Thankfully, no one did. Although it's still stuck in my mind. I'm pretty sure I saw somebody write down a 1. And I was very concerned about that, but they didn't admit to it, even if there was. Anyway, I spent 10 minutes. I said, write down all the things that made it not 0. And I specifically said, thinking about the interactions. So these were leaders of multiple teams. And I said, think about the interactions within your teams and between your teams and between you as the senior management team that were really good, that made this work in some way. Got them to put each idea down on a post-it note. We did a bit of affiliate affinity mapping where some ideas were related. And then I got them to interview each other and sort of walk the board. They were looking at the board, and I said, if you spot something that piques your interest and you're curious, how did that happen? Find the person who wrote the note and interview them and saying, how did you do that? How did that work? And we had a lovely fun time, you know, people walking around, grabbing notes, talking to each other. And then this is where we were running out of time, because I would have loved to have done more Future Perfect. I would have loved to have done more +1s going up on that scale. But I just said, look, going forward, what are the things you want to remember to do to continue to do this well? Out of all these things, all these, you know, whether it was skip meetings or whatever, what's on that board that you want to remember to do to continue to maintain this success? And then they jotted those down. But yeah, it was basically the picture I took of this that prompted me to think about this presentation. So I've run this SF retrospective numerous times, and it always sort of evolves in different ways. But there you go. That is a visual representation of SF. Has anybody done sort of a solution-focused retrospective or work with teams like that? I particularly find it nice if the team's a little demoralized, if the team's a bit beat up. And the first time I ever ran this was with a team that they were just copying it left, right, and center. The management was going to run roughshod over the top of them. They were demoralized. They weren't getting their work done. We ran this format, and they remembered that they'd done a lot right, that there were a bunch of things going well. And they walked out of it with a completely different motivate, or completely different, you know, the shoulders were back, their head was high. We're doing a lot right in really difficult circumstances. So you don't have to wait for the tough situation, but it is a good one to use. Okay, so one canvas, lots of post-it notes. You can see the scaling along the bottom there. I just, you know, you just have to imagine the scaling. And I always ask people to put the post-it notes around, you know, not where their number was, just put it up on the board and leave a bit of space towards the 10, because I might want to ask about what the +1s could be, or I might actually have time and explore what 10 is, but I didn't have time. And there was about 12 people in that group, so it was a good size. Strategy canvas. There's been a paper that was published some time ago. Sorry, Zoom has just done something interesting for me and changed the layout. Sorry, I didn't put the reference on there. I will include that at some point. But there was solution-focused strategy canvas, where again, you're working, it can be done personally, but can also be done, is generally done with corporate strategy. The biggest issue a lot of companies have with corporate strategy is it looks great on paper and it just doesn't get executed. It doesn't translate down to the next level of management. So the idea with this is, as a team, and there's a fair bit of work goes into this. I know people who do whole day workshops just to create this graph and all the stuff that goes around it. But the idea is they've got a strategic vision. Out of that strategic vision, there are a number of critical success factors. And I think if you had 80, it'd be too many, but I'd try and bring it down from there. Of those critical success factors, where would you rate them? 1 to 10. What are you already doing that makes it that high? And in the next quarter or next month, what are you going to work on to actually raise it up? And you check back in on this regularly. You can do this personal as well with multiple goals. I've seen that done. I've run this with at the program level in a company when you've got a number of projects, you want to see how they run. Yeah, very much apologize for not putting the reference up there. It's a great paper, and people are continuing to evolve it. One of the best guys I know who does this is Jason Pascoe in Australia. He does this with a lot of schools and a lot of leadership teams. So that's another example of a canvas. What else we got? Oh, the doc from Hayes and Moon, Dialogic Orientation Quadrant. A lot of people are using that these days to introduce SF, just to try to explain how the conversation is different. You can jot this down on a notepad in a cafe, right? Good stuff, not good stuff, past, future. And the idea is you want to have more of the conversations in the resourceful past and the preferred future, and less conversations about the troubled past and the dreaded future. And again, have I used it yet? No. But I could use this in a workshop, no problems at all. Put this up on a flip chart, have some groups break out, explore the different things, find out what common preferred futures are and how they resourceful past could move you towards it. And again, in the corporate world, dreaded future is useful to visit because it helps you with risk analysis. With any sort of project or corporate initiative or legal stuff, whatever, the dreaded future can be useful to visit and then think about how, if some of those risks eventuated, how would we handle those in an SF way? So there was a guy who gave a talk in SF24 last year about that sort of conversation within a project management framework. So very good talk. What else have I got? Even just drawing this model, and I do this, I've done this frequently with one-on-ones and performance conversations. Over a period of time, no one is constant or nothing is constant, and we can choose what to explore within that canvas. We can ask the person over time, look, in the last few weeks, there's been days that have been better than others. What was different about those days when they were better than normal? And just drawing the line helps people broaden their thinking away from the specifics. So a useful canvas. Again, I've done this with a team over a timeline. Here was the last month or the last 2 weeks of an agile sprint. What was good? What would we like to continue to do? Things like that. Physical scaling. I think if you've ever had the benefit of going to an agile training in person, you can scale from one side of the room to the other. I haven't quite worked out how to do this in a Zoom room just yet, but you define a scale. And one of the most creative retrospectives I've done recently was in a lounge room. The team I was working with was doing an offsite, and they'd rented an Airbnb, and then unbeknownst to me, they said, come in, run the retro. And I was thinking, okay, there's going to be some sort of conference room that we can work in. No, it was a lounge room, and it had, sofas and recliners in amongst the lounge room. So I still managed to do this kind of physical scaling. I said, okay, down that end towards the kitchen, that's things not going well. 10 is up that end towards the door. And in this time, the one downside I see with physical scaling is that people can see and compare. So with this team, there was enough psychological safety to say, okay, stand where you are on that line in terms of how well you think things work. And then you have a conversation about what's different. Where I first experienced this was in a training by Paul Jackson, I think. And it was something that was common. It was like, what's your experience of solutions focus, or how confident are you in applying it? So it wasn't something that could cause issues. So I was a bit hesitant about using that in the retro, but I felt that team had enough psychological safety that they were open enough to share. So one person stood at a 5 and another person stood at a 9, and it was a good and open conversation. And what I love about physical scaling is you can move your body to get a different perspective. So what I did with that team was I said, standing from where you are, look back towards 0. And the first comment out of someone's mouth was, well, we're a long way from there. We're a long way from 0. We must be doing something right. And then I said, okay, everyone step up to 10. And by physically moving the body and standing in a different spot, immediately the brain goes, this is different. And you can ask what would be different at a 10 as you look back there. What's a small, and then I brought them back to where they were, and I said, okay, take a tiny little step forward, put one, the heel in front of the toe of the other foot, step forward a bit, just feel that small difference. So I love that part of physical work. Yeah, it's not a canvas, but hey, it worked in the lounge room. Miracle question. This is where we're getting a little bit more, how to visualize SF. I used this in one of my very first presentations of solutions focus. On the one on the right, the problem of Spanishistas. This is when Harry Potter was still very prominent in pop culture. You can ask the miracle question. What if you could do some magic where the problem disappeared? What would be different? The one on the right, the left is the Tardis. Any Doctor Who fans there would recognise the Tardis? Anybody recognise the TARDIS? Come on, I can't be the only Doctor Who fan on this call. So the TARDIS is actually a time machine. Simply, a simplified version is a time machine. And if you're trying to visualize somebody in shifting their awareness with the miracle question, the idea of stepping into a doorway or a TARDIS, some threshold, and something that also gives you some distance, and then stepping back out and something is different. It's a great way of actually having a temporal shift that creates the ability to ask the miracle question. It's part of the hypnotic induction. Yeah, have a bit of fun with this. I'd love to have a cardboard cutout of a TARDIS in a conference room one day. But even just any threshold, does anybody have the experience where you walk from one room to the other and you've forgotten what you entered that room for? And it's something to do with crossing a threshold. So, even if you're working with somebody in person and you would like them to experience a physical shift of a miracle question, walk them over a threshold. It's an interesting neurological trick. All right, I think we're about out of my examples. Oh, this one I did in a meeting the other day, literally yesterday or the day before. And I thought this is another visual SF idea. So in Agile, in the Agile software development world, there's a question we ask called the fist of fives. And it might be at the end of a project estimation meeting. There was a group of 5, 6 people, and I said, okay, holding up your hand, 5 is you're really confident about our estimates, and 0 is the opposite. And I said, to avoid confirmation bias, we've all just got to hold the hand up and go 1, 2, 3, and whatever number of fingers you want to hold up. And it occurred to me that's a scaling question. It's a confidence scaling question. So you were actually using our hand to visualize that confidence. And look, somebody in the group was at a 2, 2 others were at a 4, and there's a great conversation there about, okay, you guys at a 4, you seem really confident with these estimates. What are you guys noticing? And then the person who was a 2, I said, well, that's still not a 0, so you're a little bit confident. What gives you some of that confidence? And then just, what's the difference? Why are you at a 2? What are you thinking that maybe we've missed? So yeah, hand, there you go. You've got a built-in scaling tool that comes with you wherever you are. And of course, I don't know, I talk with my hands a lot, but you can do scaling like this as well. Somebody just dropped something in the chat. What's that one? Andy Roberts has amazing collection. of canvases for everywhere, and not necessarily just, but can of course adjust them. Fantastic. Thanks for sharing that, Anu. All right, I am out of examples.